It's my journey, it's your journey. You need my help and I need yours. 'Cause we are...
Welcome to Journeys of Faith. Brother Joseph Frey Aldenhoven here. Be sure to look at the description for special information of interest to you. Pope John Paul II, the Pilgrim Pope's legacy of Eucharistic devotion. In the sprawling tapestry of Catholic history, few figures loom as large as Pope John Paul II, a man whose life was a pilgrimage, both literal and spiritual, etched into the heart of the Church. Known as the Pilgrim Pope, he traversed the globe, logging over 700,000 miles to bring the gospel to the farthest corners of the world, from bustling cities to remote villages. But beyond the staggering statistics and the historic papacy lies a deeper story, a profound devotion to the Eucharist that shaped his mission and continues to inspire millions. At Journeys of Faith, we've long been captivated by the way this saintly pontiff mirrored our own mission, walking the path of faith, uncovering the sacred, and drawing souls closer to Christ through the Blessed Sacrament. Picture this: a young Karol Wojtyła, long before the white cassock and the weight of the papacy, kneeling in a dim Polish church during the darkest days of World War II. The Eucharist wasn't just a ritual for him, it was a lifeline, a source of strength amid Nazi occupation and personal loss. That same reverence carried him through his 26-year pontificate, where he championed Eucharistic adoration and urged the faithful to encounter Christ in the breaking of the bread. For us at Journeys of Faith, founded by Bob and Penny Lord in 1980, out of a shared passion for Eucharistic miracles and the lives of the saints, John Paul II's legacy feels like a guiding light. Our ministry, through books, pilgrimages, and media, seeks to echo his call to deeper communion with Christ, inviting Catholics everywhere to rediscover the transformative power of the sacraments. This isn't just history, it's a living invitation. As we unpack the Pilgrim Pope's Eucharistic devotion, we'll journey through the moments that defined his spiritual witness, from his tireless travels to his writings like Ecclesia de Eucharistia. Whether you're a lifelong Catholic or someone seeking to deepen your faith, join us on this exploration. At Journeys of Faith, we believe, as John Paul II did, that every step toward the Eucharist is a step toward the heart of God. Let's walk this road together, inspired by a Pope who showed us that faith isn't just believed, it's lived. Early life and Eucharistic awakening. Before he became the globe-trotting pontiff known as the Pilgrim Pope, Karol Wojtyła was just a boy in Wadowice, Poland, navigating a world of profound loss and quiet faith. Born in 1920, young Karol faced tragedy early. His mother died when he was just 9, and his older brother followed a few years later. These personal earthquakes could have shattered a lesser spirit, but instead they seemed to forge in him a deep, almost unshakable reliance on the divine. You can almost picture him, a lanky kid with soulful eyes, kneeling in the dim light of his parish church, finding solace not just in prayer, but in the tangible presence of Christ in the Eucharist. It wasn't some grand cinematic moment that awakened Karol to the power of the Blessed Sacrament. No, it was the slow grind of daily life, those early mornings at Mass before school, the rhythm of the liturgy seeping into his bones. He'd later write about how the Eucharist became his source and summit, a phrase that's almost a cliche in Catholic circles now. But for him, it was raw, real, lived. As a teenager, he'd linger after Mass, not out of obligation, but because he felt something there, a connection to the eternal that anchored him amid Poland's growing shadows of war and oppression. By the time he entered the underground seminary during World War II, risking his life under Nazi occupation, the Eucharist wasn't just a ritual for Karol, it was a lifeline. He'd celebrate clandestine masses in basements and hidden rooms, the consecrated host a quiet act of defiance against a regime that sought to crush both body and soul. This wasn't abstract theology, this was survival, and it shaped him, long before the white cassock and the papal tiara, into a man who'd eventually carry that same Eucharistic fire to the world stage, urging millions to see the host not as a symbol, but as the beating heart of their faith. Join us on a journey of faith with Journeys of Faith. Hey there, fellow seekers of the sacred. If the incredible legacy of Pope John Paul II, the Pilgrim Pope, has stirred something in your soul, let's take that inspiration to the next level. At Journeys of Faith, we're all about diving deep into the heart of Catholic devotion through the Eucharist, the saints, and the transformative power of pilgrimage. Since 1980, we've been guiding Catholics like you to encounter Christ in profound, life-changing ways, just as our founders Bob and Penny Lord did on their own journey of healing and faith. Here's how you can walk this path with us. Explore our media, dive into our 25 plus books, EWTN television series, DVDs, and ebooks that unpack the mysteries of Eucharistic miracles and saintly lives. Join a pilgrimage following the footsteps of Pope John Paul II by joining one of our sacred journeys to holy sites worldwide. Deepen your faith, attend a retreat at our Holy Family Mission in Arkansas, or engage with our newsletters and digital content for ongoing formation. Let's journey together toward deeper communion with Christ. Visit our website today and discover how Journeys of Faith can inspire your own pilgrimage of the heart. The Pilgrim Pope, A Life on the Road. Let's hit the road with Pope John Paul II, a man who didn't just lead the church from the gilded halls of the Vatican, but took his mission to the streets, the slums, and the far-flung corners of the globe. Known as the Pilgrim Pope, he logged over 700,000 miles across 129 countries during his pontificate, turning papal travel into a defining feature of his 27-year reign. This wasn't just about racking up frequent flyer miles. Every journey was a deliberate act of faith, a way to meet his flock where they lived, suffered, and prayed. Picture this. It's 1979, and John Paul II steps off a plane in Mexico, his first international trip as Pope. The crowd is electric, millions strong, waving flags and weeping as this Polish pontiff kneels to kiss the ground, a gesture he'd repeat on nearly every arrival. He wasn't there to sightsee. He came to ignite hearts, speaking directly to the poor and marginalized, his homilies laced with a call to dignity and solidarity. That trip set the tone. Whether he was in war-torn Sarajevo, communist Poland, or the heart of Africa, his presence was a living sermon, a reminder that the church isn't a distant institution, but a family bound by Christ. His pilgrimages weren't without risk. In 1981, just 2 years into his papacy, he survived an assassination attempt in St. Peter's Square, only to return to the road with even more resolve. Pain and frailty marked his later years. Parkinson's disease slowed his steps, but he pressed on, his stooped figure and trembling hands becoming a powerful witness to perseverance. He once said, "I am a pilgrim on the roads of the world," and he meant it. From World Youth Days that rallied millions of young Catholics to historic visits, like his 1986 stop at a synagogue in Rome, the first by a pope since St. Peter, he showed that faith isn't static. It moves, it seeks, it embraces. Behind the scenes, these trips were logistical nightmares, coordinating security, local clergy, and massive crowds in an era before smartphones was no small feat. Yet John Paul II thrived on the chaos, often veering off script to shake hands, bless children, or pray in unexpected places. He had a knack for turning a planned itinerary into a sacred adventure, reminding us that the gospel isn't confined to cathedrals. It's alive in the dust of the journey. Centrality of the Eucharist in his theology. Let's dive into the beating heart of Pope John Paul II's spiritual vision, the Eucharist. For this man, the Blessed Sacrament wasn't just a ritual or a symbol. It was the very source and summit of Christian life, a truth he hammered home in everything he wrote, said, and did. In his 2003 encyclical Ecclesia de Eucharistia, he didn't mince words, calling the Eucharist the heart of the Church's life. He saw it as the ultimate encounter with Christ, a moment where the divine crashes into the human, transforming anyone who approaches with an open heart. John Paul II's theology wasn't abstract or academic. It was raw, personal, lived. He often reflected on how the Mass sustained him through the darkest chapters of his life, from the Nazi occupation of Poland to the assassination attempt in 1981. For him, the Eucharist was a lifeline, a tangible reminder of Christ's sacrifice and presence. He urged Catholics to see every Mass not as a routine obligation, but as a radical act of communion with Jesus and with each other. The Eucharist builds the church, he wrote, emphasizing how it knits believers into one body, no matter the divisions of culture or time. He also had this knack for connecting the Eucharist to everyday grit. In his teachings, he'd point out how receiving Christ in the sacrament equips us for the grind of life, how it fuels forgiveness, service, and love in a world that's often cold and unforgiving. This wasn't pie in the sky stuff, it was practical spirituality for the trenches. Whether he was celebrating Mass for millions at World Youth Day or in a quiet chapel, his reverence was electric, a silent sermon that spoke louder than words. The Eucharist for John Paul II wasn't just central to theology, it was the key to unlocking a life of faith that could withstand anything. Dominicae Cenae encyclical on the mystery and worship of the Eucharist. Let's dive into one of the cornerstone documents of Pope John Paul II's papacy, Dominicae Cenae, released on February 24, 1980. This isn't just a letter, it's a heartfelt cry from a shepherd who saw the Eucharist as the beating heart of the church. If you've ever wondered how deeply a pope could challenge the faithful to rediscover something so central, yet often taken for granted, this encyclical is your answer. John Paul II doesn't mince words here. He lays out the Eucharist as the source and summit of Christian life, a mystery that demands not just reverence, but a total reorientation of how we live. He's writing to bishops and priests, sure, but you can feel his gaze piercing through to every Catholic in the pews. He's asking, are we truly encountering Christ in this sacrament? Are we letting it transform us? He warns against the danger of routine, of letting the Mass become a mere habit rather than a profound meeting with the living God. It's a gut punch delivered with the tenderness of a father who knows the stakes. What's striking is how he ties Eucharistic devotion to the broader life of the church. He's not just talking about personal piety, though he's all for that, urging frequent adoration and time before the Blessed Sacrament. No, he's connecting the dots to community, to mission. The Eucharist, he insists, isn't a private treasure to hoard. It's fuel for evangelization, for building a world rooted in charity and justice. You can almost hear him pleading, take this seriously, because the world is starving for the love only Christ can give through this sacrament. And then there's his call for liturgical fidelity. John Paul II isn't playing around when he stresses the importance of celebrating the Mass with the dignity it deserves. He's seen the cracks, sloppy practices, watered down reverence, and he's not having it. But this isn't about legalism, it's about love. He wants the faithful to experience the full depth of the mystery, unmarred by carelessness. It's a reminder that the Eucharist isn't just a symbol or a nice ritual, it's the real presence of Christ demanding our awe. This encyclical isn't some dusty theological text, it's a roadmap. John Paul II is handing us the tools to rediscover the Eucharist as the center of our faith, a wellspring of grace that can heal a fractured world. If you've ever felt spiritually adrift, his words cut through the fog, pointing back to the altar as the place where heaven and earth collide. Eucharistic World Youth Days. In the sprawling tapestry of Pope John Paul II's pontificate, few initiatives shimmer with as much raw, transformative energy as World Youth Day, WYD. Launched in 1985, this global gathering of young Catholics became a hallmark of his papacy, a pulsating, faith-fueled festival that drew millions to encounter Christ, often through the lens of Eucharistic devotion. John Paul II, ever the shepherd with a heart for the young, saw these events as more than just mega meetups. They were battlegrounds for the soul, where the Eucharist stood as the ultimate weapon against a secular world's creeping indifference. Picture the scenes, hundreds of thousands of youth from every corner of the globe converging in cities like Rome, Denver, or Manila, their voices rising in a cacophony of languages, yet unified in worship. At the heart of each WYD was the Eucharistic celebration, a Mass that wasn't just a ritual but a seismic event. John Paul II, often frail in his later years, yet burning with spiritual vigor, would stand before these crowds, elevating the host as if to say, "This is your lifeline. Cling to it." His homilies during these masses weren't dry lectures. They were rallying cries, urging the young to anchor their lives in the real presence, to let Christ's body and blood fuel their mission in a hurting world. Take WWY 1993 in Denver, for instance, a turning point for American Catholicism. Against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, over 500,000 gathered, many skeptical that such a religious event could compete with the allure of pop culture. Yet when John Paul II celebrated the closing Mass with the Eucharist as the focal point, something shifted. Pilgrims wept, knelt, and later testified to conversions that reshaped their lives. He spoke of the Eucharist as the source and summit of Christian life, a phrase from Vatican II that he wielded like a sword, cutting through apathy. It wasn't just a moment, it was a movement, one that rippled through parishes and families long after the event ended. Or consider Manila in 1995, where an estimated 4 million souls, the largest papal gathering in history, crowded together under the tropical sun. John Paul II, undeterred by the heat or his own physical struggles, centered the event on Eucharistic adoration. He knew the power of silence before the Blessed Sacrament, how it could pierce the noise of modernity and speak directly to restless hearts. Young people, many from impoverished backgrounds, found in that sacred encounter a dignity the world often denied them. The Pope's message was clear. The Eucharist isn't a relic of the past, it's the beating heart of the Church's future, and you, the youth, are its guardians. These Eucharistic moments at World Youth Days weren't just spectacles, they were seeds planted in fertile ground. John Paul II understood that the young weren't just the church of tomorrow, they were the church of right now. By placing the Eucharist at the core of WYD, he handed them a compass, a source of strength to navigate a culture often hostile to faith. His legacy in these gatherings isn't just in the numbers or the headlines, but in the countless quiet transformations. The hearts turned back to Christ through the mystery of his body and blood, Marian devotion, and Eucharistic depth. Let's dive into the spiritual core of Pope John Paul II's legacy, where his devotion to Mary and the Eucharist intertwined like a sacred dance, each step revealing a deeper truth about faith. This wasn't just theology for him, it was personal, raw, and lived. Growing up in Poland, a land steeped in Marian reverence, young Karol Wojtyła found in the Blessed Mother a source of strength amid the chaos of war and loss. His motto, "Totus tuus," totally yours, wasn't a catchy slogan, but a surrender, a promise to Mary that shaped his priesthood and papacy. He credited her intercession for saving his life during the 1981 assassination attempt, pointing to Our Lady of Fatima as his shield. That moment wasn't just a headline, it was a testament to a bond forged in prayer and trust. But Mary, for John Paul II, always pointed to Christ, specifically to Christ in the Eucharist. He saw the Mass as the heartbeat of the Church, the source and summit of Christian life, and he lived it with an intensity that could shake you awake. Whether he was celebrating Mass in St. Peter's Square or a muddy field in a remote village, his reverence was palpable, kneeling, often trembling before the Blessed Sacrament, as if the weight of the world's sins and hopes rested on that moment of consecration. He wrote extensively on the Eucharist, notably in his 2003 encyclical Ecclesia de Eucharistia, where he called it the mystery of faith that unites us to Christ's sacrifice. For him, the Eucharist wasn't a ritual, it was an encounter, a call to radical love and service. This dual devotion, Mary leading to Christ, Christ present in the Eucharist, drove his mission as the pilgrim pope. He didn't just preach it, he embodied it, traveling the globe to bring that mystery to the margins, to the forgotten, to the doubting. Every pilgrimage, every World Youth Day was a chance to say, look at Mary, trust her, and she'll take you straight to the altar, to the real presence. It's no accident that his pontificate saw a renewed hunger for Eucharistic adoration among the faithful. He planted that seed, watering it with his own unshakable witness. Encounters with Eucharistic miracles. When you dig into the life of Pope John Paul II, you can't help but stumble upon his profound connection to the Eucharist, a devotion that wasn't just theological, but deeply personal, almost visceral. This wasn't a man who merely preached about the real presence. He lived it, sought it out, and let it shape his papacy. His encounters with Eucharistic miracles, those inexplicable events that defy science and scream divine intervention, were like waypoints on his spiritual journey, moments that fueled his mission to bring the world closer to Christ's heart. Take, for instance, his unwavering reverence for the Eucharistic miracle of Lanciano, Italy, a miracle dating back to the 8th century where a consecrated host transformed into human flesh and blood. John Paul II didn't just nod to this as a historical curiosity, he made a point to venerate it during his visits to Italy, often speaking of how such miracles are a visible sign of Christ's enduring presence among us. He saw these events as a call to action, a reminder that the Eucharist isn't a static ritual, but a living encounter. His writings and homilies often circled back to this idea. If God would go so far as to leave tangible proof of his love, how could we not respond with awe and devotion? Then there's the lesser known but equally striking moment during his 1996 visit to Venezuela, where he addressed the faithful in the presence of the Eucharistic miracle of Betania, a host that reportedly bled during a Mass in 1991. John Paul II didn't shy away from the mystery. He leaned into it, using the occasion to preach about the Eucharist as the source and summit of Christian life. He had this knack for cutting through skepticism with a quiet, unshakable certainty. You can almost picture him stooped with age but burning with conviction, urging the crowd to see beyond the physical and into the divine reality, a reality he'd staked his life on. These weren't just isolated stops on a papal itinerary, they were part of a larger pattern, a pilgrimage within a pilgrimage where John Paul II sought out these sacred mysteries to remind himself and the world that the Eucharist is the beating heart of the Church. He wasn't chasing miracles for spectacle, he was chasing Christ, pointing us toward the same pursuit with every gesture, every word. Implementing Corpus Christi processions worldwide, Pope John Paul II, with his boundless energy and unyielding devotion to the Eucharist, didn't just preach about the body of Christ, he took to the streets literally to show the world what it meant. One of his most enduring contributions was his passionate push for Corpus Christi processions, a tradition that had waned in many corners of the globe by the late 20th century. He saw these public displays of faith not as quaint relics of a bygone era, but as vital, living testimonies to the real presence, Christ walking among his people. From the cobblestone streets of Rome to the dusty roads of small villages, John Paul II made it his mission to revive and expand these processions during his pontificate. He led by example, often walking through the eternal city himself, carrying the monstrance with a reverence that could silence even the most distracted bystander. His first Corpus Christi procession as Pope in 1979 wasn't just a ceremonial act. It was a gauntlet thrown down to a secularizing world. Faith would not be confined to church walls. Under his guidance, the feast became a global rallying cry, with dioceses from Latin America to Eastern Europe reinstating or amplifying their own processions, often with the Pope's personal encouragement during his countless international visits. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. In some regions, particularly in post-communist countries or areas grappling with religious indifference, the idea of marching through town with a consecrated host drew skepticism or outright resistance. John Paul II, ever the strategist, didn't shy away from the challenge. He framed these processions as acts of courage and unity, urging bishops and local clergy to adapt traditions to their cultural context while preserving the core reverence. In Poland, his homeland, he transformed Corpus Christi into a national event, blending folk customs with profound liturgy, a masterclass in making the sacred accessible. Data from the time shows a marked increase in participation. By the mid-1980s, cities like Krakow reported tens of thousands joining processions, a direct ripple of his influence. This wasn't just about pageantry. John Paul II believed that seeing the Eucharist carried through public spaces, past markets, schools, and government buildings, reminded society of Christ's inescapable presence in every facet of life. His writings, like the 2003 encyclical Ecclesia de Eucharistia, hammered this home. The Eucharist isn't a private devotion, it's a public mission. He wanted Catholics to feel emboldened to wear their faith as proudly as he did, even when the cultural winds blew cold. And so, from Manila to Mexico City, the sight of flower-strewn paths and kneeling faithful became a hallmark of his era, a testament to a pope who knew how to turn belief into action, teaching through suffering, the Eucharist, and the cross. Let's get real for a moment. Pope John Paul II didn't just talk about the Eucharist as some abstract theological concept. He lived it, breathed it, and frankly bled for it. His papacy wasn't a cushy desk job. It was a grueling marathon of suffering that mirrored the very cross he preached about. From surviving an assassination attempt in 1981 to battling Parkinson's disease in his later years, John Paul II turned his personal pain into a megaphone for the gospel. And at the heart of that message, the Eucharist, the source and summit of our faith, the real presence of Christ who suffers with us. He often spoke of the Eucharist as the ultimate act of self-giving, a direct line to the sacrifice of the cross. In his 2003 encyclical Ecclesia de Eucharistia, he wrote, "The Eucharist is a mystery of presence, the perfect fulfillment of Jesus' promise to remain with us." But he didn't stop at pretty words. John Paul II showed us what that meant when he dragged himself to the altar, trembling and frail, to celebrate Mass even as his body failed him. This wasn't just a pope doing his duty. This was a man teaching us that the Eucharist isn't just bread. It's strength, it's communion, it's the grit to carry your own cross. Think about that 1981 assassination attempt in St. Peter's Square. Bullets tore through him, and yet, as he recovered, he didn't retreat into bitterness or fear. He went to his would-be assassin, forgave him, and later credited his survival to Our Lady of Fatima. But more than that, he tied his suffering to the Eucharistic mystery, often reflecting on how Christ's body, broken for us, gives meaning to our own brokenness. For John Paul II, every scar, every ache was a chance to unite with Jesus in the Mass, a lesson he hammered home in homilies and personal witness. And let's not forget how he pushed this truth out to the world. During his countless pilgrimages, over 100 international trips, he'd celebrate Mass in war zones, poverty-stricken slums, and packed stadiums, always pointing to the Eucharist as the answer to human suffering. He wasn't just a pope, he was a pilgrim of pain, showing us that the cross isn't a dead end, it's a doorway. Through the Eucharist, he taught, we don't just remember Christ's sacrifice, we participate in it, we're transformed by it, and we're called to live it out no matter how heavy our own burdens get. Promoting perpetual adoration chapels. Pope John Paul II, often called the Pilgrim Pope, didn't just preach about the Eucharist from the grand stages of St. Peter's Square or during his globe-spanning pilgrimages. He got down to the gritty personal level of devotion. One of his lesser sung but profoundly impactful initiatives was his passionate push for perpetual adoration chapels. He saw these sacred spaces as spiritual powerhouses, places where the faithful could encounter Christ in the Blessed Sacrament 24/7, no appointment needed. In his 1980 letter, Dominicae, Cenae, he urged bishops and parishes to foster Eucharistic adoration, emphasizing that it wasn't just a pious add-on, but a vital lifeline to deepen communion with God. And this wasn't abstract theology for John Paul II. He lived it. Stories abound of him slipping into quiet chapels during his travels, often unannounced, to kneel before the tabernacle. He believed that perpetual adoration, where the Eucharist is exposed continuously, with adorers taking shifts to ensure Christ is never alone, could transform not just individuals, but entire communities. He saw it as a countercultural act, a rebellion against a world obsessed with noise and distraction, calling Catholics to sit in silence with the real presence. He even linked this practice to vocations, noting in multiple addresses how time before the Eucharist often sparked calls to priesthood and religious life. His advocacy wasn't just words. During his pontificate, the number of perpetual adoration chapels surged, with many parishes inspired by his example to establish their own. He framed it as a mission. If the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith, as Vatican II declared, then why wouldn't we guard it, honor it, and dwell with it constantly? For John Paul II, these chapels were outposts of grace, places where the weary, the seeking, and the broken could find healing in Christ's presence, a legacy that still challenges us to prioritize the spiritual over the fleeting. A lasting legacy of faith and devotion. As we reflect on the extraordinary life of Pope John Paul II, the Pilgrim Pope, his unwavering devotion to the Eucharist stands as a beacon for Catholics everywhere. His journeys across the globe weren't just papal visits, they were pilgrimages of the heart, calling us to kneel before the Blessed Sacrament with renewed awe. At Journeys of Faith, we're inspired by his example, carrying forward the mission to deepen communion with Christ through the stories of saints and sacred places. Just as John Paul II traversed continents to bring the gospel to life, we invite you to embark on your own journey, whether through our books, media, or transformative pilgrimages to holy sites. Since 1980, Journeys of Faith has been guiding Catholics like you to encounter the divine in the Eucharist and the lives of the faithful. Let the Pilgrim Pope's legacy stir your soul. Explore our resources, join a retreat at Holy Family Mission, or walk in the footsteps of saints on a pilgrimage. Together, let's answer his call to a deeper faith rooted in the real presence and the timeless witness of the Church. FAQs about Pope John Paul II and his Eucharistic legacy. Who was Pope John Paul II? Pope John Paul II, born Karol Józef Wojtyła in 1920 in Poland, was the head of the Catholic Church from 1978 to 2005, making him one of the longest-serving popes in history. A man of profound faith, he survived the horrors of World War II, including the Nazi occupation of his homeland, and later became a voice of hope under communist oppression. As Pope, he was a tireless advocate for human dignity, peace, and the sanctity of life, while also being a spiritual father to millions. His deep love for Christ in the Eucharist shaped his papacy, inspiring countless Catholics to encounter Jesus in a transformative way. What does the Pilgrim Pope refer to? The Pilgrim Pope is a fitting nickname for Pope John Paul II, who traveled more than any other pope in history, visiting 129 countries across his 27-year pontificate. These journeys weren't just diplomatic missions, they were pilgrimages of faith, often centered on bringing the gospel to the margins of society. Whether celebrating Mass in remote villages or massive stadiums, he carried a message of hope and unity, often emphasizing the Eucharist as the heart of Catholic life. For us at Journeys of Faith, his example as a pilgrim resonates deeply with our mission to lead others to sacred sites and deeper communion with Christ. How did Pope John Paul II promote Eucharistic devotion? Pope John Paul II made Eucharistic devotion a cornerstone of his ministry, urging Catholics to see the Mass not just as a ritual, but as a personal encounter with the living Christ. He celebrated Mass with palpable reverence, often in diverse cultural contexts during his travels, showing how the Eucharist transcends borders. He also instituted the Year of the Eucharist in 2004 to 2005, calling the faithful to renew their love for this sacrament. Through his writings, homilies, and public witness, he invited everyone to kneel before the Blessed Sacrament and find strength in Christ's presence. Why is the Eucharist central to Pope John Paul II's teachings? For Pope John Paul II, the Eucharist wasn't just a symbol, it was the source and summit of the Christian life, a truth he hammered home time and again. He believed that without the Eucharist, the Church would lose its identity, its connection to Christ's sacrifice on the cross. It was the ultimate expression of God's love, a gift that sustains believers through suffering and unites them as one body. His own life, marked by personal trials and physical pain, reflected this reliance on the Eucharist as a wellspring of grace, a theme we at Journeys of Faith echo in our evangelization efforts. What major documents did Pope John Paul II write on the Eucharist? Pope John Paul II penned several profound works on the Eucharist, but the standout is his 2003 encyclical Ecclesia de Eucharistia. The Church draws her life from the Eucharist. In it, he explores the mystery of the sacrament, its role in building the Church, and the urgent need to rediscover Eucharistic wonder in a secular world. He also addressed the Eucharist in other writings, like his 1980 letter Dominicae, Cenae, where he reflected on the Last Supper and the priest's role in celebrating this mystery. These documents are treasures for anyone seeking to deepen their faith, much like the resources we offer at Journeys of Faith. How did Pope John Paul II inspire Eucharistic adoration worldwide? Pope John Paul II didn't just talk about Eucharistic adoration, he lived it. He spent hours in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, often late into the night, setting an example of intimate communion with Christ. He encouraged parishes to establish perpetual adoration chapels, believing that time spent with Jesus in the Eucharist could transform hearts and societies. His personal devotion, paired with public calls during World Youth Days and papal audiences, sparked a global renewal of adoration practices, a movement we at Journeys of Faith continue to champion through our retreats and media. Which World Youth Day events focused on the Eucharist? World Youth Day, a signature initiative of Pope John Paul II, often placed the Eucharist at its heart. Notably, the 1993 event in Denver, Colorado, featured powerful Eucharistic celebrations that left a lasting impact on American youth, with many citing it as a turning point in their faith. The 2000 Jubilee Year event in Rome also emphasized the sacrament, culminating in a massive Eucharistic procession. These gatherings weren't just feel-good rallies, they were spiritual battlegrounds where young people encountered Christ in the Eucharist, a mission close to our heart at Journeys of Faith. What did Pope John Paul II say about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist? Pope John Paul II was unwavering on the doctrine of the real presence, that the bread and wine truly become the body and blood of Christ during Mass. In Ecclesia de Eucharistia, he wrote, "The Eucharistic sacrifice makes present not only the mystery of the Savior's passion and death, but also the mystery of the resurrection which crowned his sacrifice." He insisted this wasn't a mere metaphor, but a reality that demands awe and adoration, a truth we at Journeys of Faith strive to illuminate through our teachings on Eucharistic miracles and the saints. How did Pope John Paul II's travels emphasize the Eucharist? Every journey Pope John Paul II undertook was, in a sense, a Eucharistic pilgrimage. He celebrated Mass in war-torn regions, under oppressive regimes, and in cultural melting pots, showing that the Eucharist is the universal language of the Church. From the slums of Manila to the plains of Africa, he brought Christ's presence to the people, often under grueling conditions in his later years. His travels mirrored the missionary spirit of carrying the gospel and the Eucharist to all nations, a vision that inspires our pilgrimages at Journeys of Faith to sacred Catholic destinations. What is Ecclesia de Eucharistia? Ecclesia de Eucharistia, released in 2003, is Pope John Paul II's encyclical dedicated to the Eucharist, written as a heartfelt plea to rediscover the sacrament's centrality in Catholic life. He reflects on how the Church draws her strength from this mystery, addresses liturgical abuses, and calls for a renewed sense of wonder before the Blessed Sacrament. It's a roadmap for living a Eucharistic life, especially poignant as one of his final major teachings before his death in 2005. At Journeys of Faith, we see this document as a guiding light for our mission to educate and inspire deeper faith through the Eucharist. Thanks for listening to Super Saints Podcast. Be sure to click the link in the description for special news items.
It's your journey.